The college admissions process. If you've ever been through it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That mix of excitement and, let's be honest, a whole lot of stress. But what if the whole system, just by being so complicated, creates a massive, unfair advantage before anyone even fills out an application?
Right. This is the big question, isn't it? The one that hangs over everything. Are we really looking at a level playing field, a true meritocracy, or is there something else going on under the surface? Well, we're going to dig into what the data actually says. And the answer? It might be a lot simpler and way more important than you think.
So here it is. This is the core idea, the one thing to keep in mind. The more complicated, confusing, and full of unwritten rules a system is, the more it helps people who have the money and resources to figure it out, and, by default, it penalizes everyone else.
Which brings us to our first part. Let's think about this not just as a process, but as a game. A really high-stakes game, where, it turns out, not everyone gets the same rule book.
And this is really the fundamental split. When a system is this complex, it creates a whole industry of guides. Private consultants who can decode the whole thing for a hefty fee. It's a huge leg up that is literally for sale. And if you can't afford that guide, you're stuck trying to find your way through the maze all on your own.
But it's not just about hiring someone. There's actually a technical term for why all this confusion is so harmful, and it points to a kind of hidden tax that's just baked right into the system.
Yeah, the experts call it administrative burden. I like to call it the hassle factor. You know what I mean. It's all the hours you pour into just learning the rules, the stress of double-checking every single form, and that sinking feeling in your gut that you're missing something important. It's all the friction that makes a process painful.
And, this hassle factor isn't shared equally. For students from lower-income families, it's so much heavier. They usually have less access to school counselors who've seen it all. Their parents might be working 2 jobs and just don't have the time. And maybe most importantly, they're often less familiar with the hidden curriculum, all those unwritten rules about what top colleges are really looking for.
Okay, so that's the problem, and it's a big one. But what's the fix? This is where things get really, really interesting. Because it turns out we have rock-solid proof that just making things simpler can be one of the most powerful ways to make things fairer.
So, let's look at our first piece of evidence. It's a fantastic experiment that deals with the FAFSA. That super long, super complicated financial aid form in the US. Researchers got together with H&R Block to test out a pretty simple idea.
I mean, look how smart this is. Instead of making families dig up old tax returns and answer dozens of confusing questions, the researchers did 3 simple things. They took the tax data the family had just finished preparing, they used it to automatically fill in the FAFSA, and then, bam, they gave them an instant estimate of how much aid they qualified for. They just removed the hassle.
And the result? It was absolutely staggering. Just making that one form easier led to a huge jump in those students enrolling in college. And maybe even more importantly, they were more likely to stay in college. It's a perfect example of our main point. You reduce the complexity, you increase the opportunity. Simple as that.
Okay, but simplifying forms is only one part of it, right? What about just knowing which colleges to even apply to? That brings us to a second amazing study, the ECO project, which took that information gap problem head on.
So let me ask you a question. How much do you think it costs to totally change the trajectory of a smart, high-achieving student from a low-income family? A couple $1,000? A few hundred? Nope. Try $6.
That's right. For $6 a kid, this project mailed out a special packet, and inside was a customized guide that basically said, hey, based on your test scores, you're good enough for the Ivy League. It gave them a list of top colleges they'd probably get into, info on financial aid, and waivers so they wouldn't have to pay to apply.
So what happened? Well, you can see it right here. The results were just off the charts. The students who got that $6 packet were way more likely to apply to, get accepted by, and actually enroll in a top-tier school. The intervention didn't change the students. They were already brilliant. It just changed their access to information and opportunity.
Now, these simple, cheap solutions are incredibly powerful, but they exist in a totally different universe from the other side of college admissions, a world where every single possible advantage has a price tag attached.
You can really see the 2 parallel worlds here. On one side, you've got these public-spirited solutions built for fairness and scale, and on the other, you have this private industry that's all about giving you an exclusive edge.
Everything from packaging your essay to planning your extracurriculars since you were a kid.
And what does that exclusive edge cost? Well, at the very high end, some of these private consultants charge upwards of $750 an hour. We're not talking about a little proofreading here. We're talking about buying a level of strategic planning that most families couldn't even imagine.
So what you end up with is a system where the ability to cut through all the complexity is a luxury item. It makes the gap between the haves and the have-nots even wider, and it basically turns the whole admissions process into an auction for who gets the best advantage.
Okay, so where does all this leave us? If we know that complexity is the problem and simplicity is the solution, what does that actually mean for designing a truly fair admission system, especially when we're talking about the most elite schools?
Well, a huge study from a group called Opportunity Insights dug into real admissions data and found something pretty mind-blowing. Once you account for grades and test scores, the massive leg up that kids from the top 1% get in admissions, it doesn't come from their academics. It comes from everything else.
And this is exactly where that complexity we've been talking about lives. The advantage is in things like legacy preferences, if your parents went there. It's in recruitment for niche sports like squash or crew. And it's in getting higher ratings on those fuzzy, subjective, non-academic things, like extracurriculars. These are the parts of the application where having wealth and an expert guide can make all the difference.
So let's just put a bow on this. The evidence is overwhelming. Whether we're talking about financial aid forms or the so-called holistic review at elite schools, every single layer of complexity, every subjective rating, every unwritten rule, it just creates another opening for wealth to buy an advantage. The playbook for how to win the game is for sale, and that fundamentally rigs the entire system.
Which really just leaves us with one final, pretty uncomfortable question. We have proof, actual proof from real-world experiments that making things simpler creates more fairness and more opportunity. We know that complexity is the enemy of a level playing field. So if we actually want a system based on what you know, not who you know, what are we waiting for?